So I'm Kelly Williams, and I've recently returned from an artist residency in Ireland, where I've collected peat ash sourced from endangered boglands and water from St. Brigid's Holy Well, and with stories and myths and histories all tied to the landscape. Those materials and narratives come back into the studio with me and become part of the physical structure and conceptual backbone of the work that I make. I layer beeswax, spray the surface with holy water, I burn with open flames and create craters, ridges that all mirror the way terrain is shaped over long spans of time. I carve deep gouges and I smooth over other areas with hot irons, and sometimes I even leave work in the sun, using nature to help collaborate with the process. Peat ash and carbon are mixed with holy water and fused with the torches so they become part of the surface itself. It's kind of a shared skin where body and island are of the same form, and that echoes Ireland. Ireland is a place named for a goddess and long understood as a living feminine presence. So across the series, the forms move between abstraction and figuration. Some works become these torn torsos, island-like forms, and they cast a shadow when suspended, and sometimes the bodies will shift with heat and temperature shifts, and that animated by that same force that shaped them. Others become puzzle-like constellations of shapes that recall like aerial land divisions, standing stones, sundials, fairy circles, and just other fragments of old myth. Passages of gold and copper surface in the work, and that's about questioning what we call precious and what we choose to burn. So boglands have been stripped to carbon, goddesses have been softened to saints, the women who carried the old ways have turned to ash. So in all of them, land and body share the same surface, built from the wax, the ash, the carbon, the blessings, and the fire. So that's my little statement. So now we can do the question.
So can you tell me more about St. Brigid's Well?
So in Ireland, there's a whole series of wells, and those wells have existed pre-church over history for millennia, and it's the place where people will go to gather water, not just for water, but for blessings and healing. And so they have a really deep, long historical mythology that goes with them. And then over time, that's where the Catholic churches would set up their church, and then it would become the saint of that area. So it really starts pre-church and moved on through. And so there's something about that water, again, another elemental substance that I could use and integrate into the work that added more than just place, but also came with the history and the blessings and the healing effects of that water. So getting it home from Ireland was a bit tricky. So I ended up having to pack it and actually put it in my suitcases really well so that I have enough to get me through a period of time. So when that water is gone, when that St. Brigid's water is gone, that will be the end of that series.
Yes. You mentioned you just finished the residency recently. What was the one aha moment that you had during your residency that you think has really changed you as an artist?
You know, it's actually, if I'm super honest, it was a moment where I had a lot of failed experiments. Because when you're in a residency, at least for me, I didn't go over with like, this is exactly what I'm gonna do. Part of it is you wanna be inspired and moved by the space that you're in. And I've gone twice, 2 different residencies. And this last residency, I had a grand idea. And it actually turned into quite a disaster. I collected seaweed from the edges of waterways and brought that back into the studio. It was a very damp period of the year, and it started to rot in the studio while I was attempting to boil it and bring out pigment and try to work with that seaweed palette. So there is no seaweed work here today, but it really was humbling. because my first residency was very successful, and I discovered peat ash, and that was my aha moment in that one. I was there in December. It was cold, so everyone's burning peat for heat. So if you don't know what peat is, it's earth is harvested from boglands, and those boglands are carbon sinks. So this industrial harvesting of these boglands is actually removing all these carbon sinks. And so then those bricks are dried and turned into fuel, which has also been used for millennia in this culture and other cultures. And that smell is very heavy in the air in the winter. And so I was constantly having a multi-sensory experience with the smell of that peat in the air at all times. But the ash was actually a beautiful rust color. And to me, that was really exciting, because I was still, you know, it was like the second week of the residency, and I was still kind of struggling. And I had that aha moment when I thought, you know, what about using ash? Because I used ash previously in work here in the Pacific Northwest using forest fire ash. So it was like, that was my like, oh, I will bring the ash, you know, the burnings and the thing that gives them fuel for food. It's what gives them heat. It's, you know, it's, again, it predates so much of industry, and now industry is there and destroying it. So there's a lot of conversations happening. I pack a lot of stuff into these pieces.
I just wanted to know, what got you interested in first using natural materials?
So I work primarily with encaustic, which is a beeswax-based paint, which in and of itself is a very natural and just fundamental medium. So I don't really like working with acrylic. I don't like working with plastics. So the beeswax kind of lends itself to wanting to use things that play nice with it. And the ash thing happened because I'd left a whole series of work outside before my studio was built, and they were all white and quite a bit of wax on them. And I came out in the morning and they were covered in ash from the Columbia Gorge fire. And I thought they were ruined. I thought my solo show was ruined. And it was in that moment, it was warm enough that the sun had actually started to fuse the ash into the wax. And I just kind of went, oh, this is it. I'm literally capturing this burning forest in my work. And that's suddenly giving so much more weight and so much more power. And also just such a statement to those that would see it and see, like, it's been preserved, which is one of the things that beeswax does, is it preserves and contains.
Almost like amber.
Yeah, well, that encaustic technically is made of 8 parts beeswax and 1 part amber. So, which is crystallized tree sap.
Do you, after that first event of the accidental participation in the environment, have you done other panels or pieces where it's like, I don't know, let's see what happens if I put it here?
Oh, sure.
And you expose it to different.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of workshops lately where I'm working with different kinds of ash, and really ash is just a form of carbon from whatever you've burnt. And so I've started experimenting with burning bones and feathers, using lamp oils for black. I'm having people come in and write things they're ready to release and use that paper, burning that, and then using that ash to then embed into the works that they're using as process pieces.
Can you tell us more about your workshops?
So yeah, I have an encaustic studio that's set up beautifully to teach others, and it's really a big part of how I am as an artist. I really do love sharing and teaching. I came to teaching accidentally, and I've run with it, and I absolutely love it, and love working and watching others really fall in love with the medium. And so I have a whole series of workshops, from very beginning workshops all the way to much more advanced workshops, working large scale, or even doing some stuff that's much more around like working, you know, at the light of the solstice and working with these kinds of natural materials and focusing on kind of the deeper meaning and the personal journey that that the individual artist is bringing to me, where they can work in their own style. I'm not necessarily teaching them a style. I'm really facilitating them working with the materials.
Did you have to build a special studio to do this?
Yeah, pretty much. In the way I mean, you can set up a studio under the right conditions with proper ventilation and all those kind of. Electrical is a big need because you're using a lot of hot tools. In my circumstance, I was able, because I built it, was able to embed or install exhaust fans directly into the walls at places that I knew would become then teaching stations.
How long have you been working with encaustic?
So I've been working with encaustic over 20 years.
Wow.
I used to do watercolor and some acrylic painting before that, and it was really just for my own personal journey. And I used to work with traumatized children with children's services as a social worker, and I would use art to help them do their own process work. And there came a point where it was time for Kelly to do her own process work.
Like art therapy?
And it really became a very strong way for me to move forward in my own mental health. And then people started asking me questions, and so I started, working with other individuals, and I bumped into encaustic at a demo at an art store, and I immediately knew. I put everything else away, and I had done nothing since. So.
I have to know, so the goddess figures, these in this show, I think I saw in your studio you've done other goddesses in different series, but these ones are Celtic?
Yeah, so these come, they're all named after either different Irish goddesses or classic names of Irish women. Because again, I think that the Irish women have been through such a deep history of repression and abuse, much like the land. And I really do see the land and the feminine, they really overlap for me. And I mean, they materially overlap as well, because if I do one of these goddesses, I make it like it's a topographical surface, and I almost treat it like it's through time. I start at the beginning and hit it with wind and sun and dirt and ash, and build up this really gritty kind of physical history as if it was a land surface. And then I find the body in it, and I tear out the edges to sort of discover the shape of the body, and then I rework into it to bring out form through shading and methods like that. But those pieces that I tear off the side end up becoming all those micro landscapes that you see kind of sprinkled around the so my small pieces on paper are actually from the body that came from the land. So it goes land, body, land. So that's how those sort of tie together.
Can you talk more about the topology of the images? And it's a question about, well, I'll make a statement, and I'll say that I look at it and say, oh, there's a lot of dimension. Is this an inside place, or am I looking at like nerve systems or capillaries?
Well, so I've done lots of
Is there a place for a person or a thing?
like a specific thing. It's more like, so let me explain what it is. It's I start just sort of loosey-goosey and until I sort of find my way. And while in Ireland, I've sort of collected shapes. So in my sketchbook and stuff like that, whether it's a sundial or looking at different maps of the way land is divided. In Ireland, you imagine those green hills and how, it's all those different shapes. And that was really fascinating, but I didn't want to come back and do Irish landscapes. That wasn't where I was at. But I looked at it more as it's like turning that onto its side and taking those shapes and puzzling them together. So there's some echoes of, the idea of fairy mounds are a really kind of big deal over there. You just don't touch them, you don't harvest on them, you don't build on them, you just leave them alone. Like you just don't. And so the idea of working with the circle and ovals as an abstract representation of that. And then the standing stones, similar thing. So I'm working with the materials that have come out of overuse of the land, and then I'm putting in these shapes that are sort of the sacred places that they will not disturb the land. So that's kind of this weird little brain, waterfall that I have with logic when I'm working with the composition of the abstracts. Yeah.
What do those segments of gold and copper mean to you here?
So those have always come out. I've used metal leafing in historical pieces, and it always came down to, it always symbolized value or preciousness. And so that meaning has threaded through all of my work. And so in this series, the idea that we've got these land resources and we've got, women are a resource. And the fact that depending on your perspective or lens you're looking through, they have a completely different value. Is it just industry stripping the land, clear cutting our forests, similar problems actually? Or is it the local farmer who's been on this land for 1,000 years and they're no longer able to access their own bog to heat their home? So it's like depending on whose value is placed on any one of these resources. And so it's more of just kind of a question of depending on how you want to perceive any situation. Resources are always going to be divided depending on your purpose.
I want to ask about, because value has a double meaning when you put it on a visual piece. But most of what you're talking about has double meaning, right? You're using fire, you're using ash, you're using St. Brigid's Wells water. I want you to talk a little bit about the interface between the fact that it has this meaning in the world already, and then this visual meaning as it translates into a painting. Whereas the gold leaf has a value in the painting. So how would you describe the materials you use and their visual qualities, and the sort of Venn diagram, how the meanings overlap with the visual elements?
Of course you'd ask me that question. I think that's the whole point. That's what I've been fettering out as I've worked with it. Because again, I don't start with it's going to look like this. I have these ingredients that came from these different experiences, whether it's the ash from the peat or the water, and then I've had these experiences out in that space and in that place, and trying to layer them both visually so that they have really good foundation in material, so that I'm doing it in a way that will have archival qualities, so they'll last for years, so they'll be physically interesting to the touch, so that they'll be visually engaging to the audience, that they'll be pleasant for me to physically make itself. So there's kind of that going back and forth between the ingredients, the raw ingredients, whether they're the physical land ingredients or the shapes and the inspiration in shape and composition, down to the surface quality and the visual image that gets placed in the end. I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
Does it matter to you if somebody understands the deeper layers of meaning, or they just see the painting? You want them to understand?
I would like it if they understood, but it is absolutely not necessary for me. For me, if they walk into it and they see, an abstract piece, and for them it reminds them of, a beautiful day on a playground. I have let go of it. Once it is sort of out in the world, so long as it has value or has meaning to the person that wants it in their life, I know it has a little bit of St. Brigid's blessing in it, and that's part of what I'm wanting to put out in the world, is that in whatever form that they want to take it in. Yeah.
Having taken classes from you, when we did the, think of something really deep for yourself and maybe write some thoughts down and burn them. And so when you have all of this deep thought prior to coming up with a piece, in your experience, does that make that much deeper?
It does
or
for me.
Change, okay.
Absolutely,
Do
it
you
does.
see that in your students?
I absolutely see that in my students too. It can be a really transitional moment for them to realize they're not just playing with materials or struggling with the object, and it takes them out of, what am I making? What's it gonna look like? Are people gonna like it? Is it pretty enough? And backs them into themselves, which is where the art should really be sourced from, and starts being more about, what do I have to say? What do I want to physically put into my piece of myself? How can I create this artifact of self? And I think every, a good piece of art is an artifact of yourself and your experience. Myrna's work absolutely is all that, from childhood through, like all those little seeds get incorporated, but working with students to get them to like back away from the end result, because our culture is so much about the product, and get back into not just the process, but the why. And I think that's the magic of art making, is being able to take that very personal thing, whether it's shared or not, or whether you even know what it is, and it's just a scribble. That scribble suddenly becomes yours if you identify it as yours. So trying to move people into that space when they're in the making of a thing.
So I feel like you just said, but so I often think about this for myself and other people, but when art is playful and art can be fun, but at some point, if it's just play, does it have an important social message or meaning or personal message? And it sounds like sometimes you start with play and maybe then you get into, what does this mean to me? Does that tend to be kind of an art?
Well, I think that there's a couple questions in there, and one of them is, my specific process. I often will start a piece, maybe just like, I don't always know what a piece is going to be. Sometimes I know I'm working on this series or with these particular ingredients. I mean, I think about it a lot like cooking. I'm a big cook. So, am I working with Indian spices? I'm gonna end up probably with a meal that looks and tastes sort of like a meal from that country. Versus if I'm working with these ingredients, it's going to go somewhere else. And sometimes you just go in your fridge and you're hungry and you just dig around and you put it all in the pot and you've got chicken soup. So that also is part of it. But I also think that artists need to play in order to gain new skills, discover new marks, let go of the performative, and just move the paint, make marks, experience your arm, grab the tool you maybe wouldn't have thought to use before, and then you're like, oh, okay. And then you start realizing that all those things you were thinking about while you were making it might actually turn into a new phrase that you can now add into the story you were working on over here. So I think it's a little of both. I mean, not everything has to have meaning. Maybe the meaning was just the act of the making, and getting more precision in your use of material. So I'm going to just say that after the talk, if you would like to go around and actually physically touch the work, it is very tactile. And I think there's something about having the work touched by others that's really lovely. Be very careful with the paper pieces, but feel free to actually physically touch the ones on panel are quite sturdy. But I think there's something really beautiful about having an opportunity in an art gallery to actually physically touch the work.
Thank you, everybody.